Hello, writers, and welcome back to Spooky Writes, your channel all about writing. I'm your host, who is secretly a ghost, Kamal Onor. Now, today I want to be talking about something that is very similar to hot, smelly garbage. That's right, I'm going to be talking about rough drafts. So if you get any value from this video, make sure to give it a good thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Help it grow. It means a lot. And with that said, let's head into the storm.
It's the raven's call, the werewolf's howl, the vampire's bite. You search through the woods for safety, but all you find is... Okay, rights.
So rough drafts are one of those things that we all have to face as authors, as writers. Any beginning writer knows that rough drafts are difficult, and rough drafts are often hot, smelly garbage. They're often terrible. And you know what? It's okay for this. It's okay for your rough draft to be terrible. In fact, your rough draft should be terrible. There's nothing wrong with your rough draft having tangents, your rough draft having characters that go nowhere. There's no reason why your rough draft is not a reflection of your ability to write. Your rough draft is not a reflection of your story as a whole. Your rough draft at its core is you telling yourself the story. And this is why so many beginning writers will say, "Oh, my story is just not going anywhere." Have you finished the story yet? Have you written the story? Do you know what's going to happen in your story? Do you know the beginning, middle, and end? Or are you have an idea for a story? Until you have written the rough draft, you do not have a story. You have to write the rough draft, and don't be overly concerned with how polished your rough draft is. You can always make edits. You can always do changes. Writing is not, we don't write in stone anymore. We write on paper, we write on computers, and because of this, it allows us to change and make edits afterwards. So there's nothing wrong with your rough draft being terrible. There's nothing wrong with your rough draft being in any state that it is. Just know that you should always improve upon each draft. You should always seek to try and be a little better with each draft that you write. And maybe that means tweaking your characters a little bit. Rough drafts are one of those things that people get so caught up in their head about. It has to be good the first time. It doesn't have to be good the first time. It can be a hot mess. It can be atrocious. You can have no semblance of a plot. You can have a rough draft where your character goes off on tangents, especially if you're not one of the writers who tends to plot out your stories, who doesn't tend to plot out your novels. I'm not one of those authors who does a lot of plotting. I tend to sit down with an idea and I'll start writing, and from that I will start to develop a story. I'll start to see how my characters develop. I'll see how the story grows from the initial idea, and this is what I would recommend. So rough drafts are not a reflection of your quality of writing. The true writing is done through the editing and the drafting. The fun part of writing is the rough draft, is telling yourself the story. And then the actual hard work is going to be that editing. It's going to be revising. It's going to be looking at what you have on the page and figuring out what you can do with it. How can you make this into a coherent story, into a coherent plot line that is going to appeal to other people, that is going to be something that people are going to want to read. Your rough draft should very much feel like this scene. So yes, your rough draft should feel like you're vomiting onto a page. Your rough draft shouldn't necessarily feel polished. Your rough draft shouldn't necessarily feel in any particular way. There's nothing wrong with a messy rough draft. There's nothing wrong with a well-conceived rough draft. There have been times, and it's very much the exception as opposed to the rule. There have been times where I have an idea for a story, and I'll sit down and I'll write it, and it will be fairly coherent from point A to point B. But I still have to go through it, and I still have to revise it. And revising is not necessarily just looking for spelling errors. It's not just looking for grammatical errors. You need to be critical of your story. You need to ask yourself, does this scene serve a purpose in the story? Does this character serve a purpose in the story? You might, in your rough draft, you might have characters that fizzle out, that fade away. It's 100% a-okay to have anything wrong going on in your rough draft, because like Neil Gaiman says, no one is going to see your rough draft. No one really cares about your rough draft. The only person who should care about your rough draft is you, the author, you, the writer. You have to be writing rough drafts. You have to write a rough draft, and once you know the story, then you can start to work it, you can start to tweak it, and you can make it as good as you initially envisioned it being. But don't worry about your rough drafts being terrible. Don't worry about your rough drafts being awful. Don't think you're a terrible writer because your rough draft is hot, smelly garbage. It's okay for your rough draft to be hot, smelly garbage. And with that, keep it spooky. Also, if you're looking for a good holiday gift this year, don't forget my book, Curse of the Black Horn, is still available on Amazon, so make sure you purchase that. Links will be down in the description below. Thank you so much for watching.